welcome to the 2023 WCIT Barney Gibbens Memorial Lecture. My name is Rob Viersitz and I'm the Deputy Master of WCIT. This lecture, part of our extensive events programme, is named after Barney Gibbens, OBE. Barney was our first master back in 1987 when we formed as a guild. Barney himself was one of the pioneers of the UK IT industry and one of the founders in 1962 of CAP, one of the very first UK systems houses. Sadly, Barney passed away in 2012, but I'm delighted that his widow, Tina Gibbens, is able to be with us this evening. You're very welcome, Tina. In 2020, a memorial lecture was instigated in Barney's memory, so that pioneers of our industry can provide us with their memories and insights. Previous presenters have been past Master Dame Stephanie Shirley, who founded F International, and Sir Robin Saxby and Herman Hauser, the founders of the semiconductor design company, ARM. And following in that track, we're delighted that Liveryman Richard Holway, MBE, has agreed to give this year's lecture. And to show how popular Richard is, we have over 180 people registered. Richard describes himself as possibly the UK's oldest IT analyst, but I would describe him as possibly the UK's best, smartest, and well-connected IT analyst. A chronicler of one of the most rapid rises and changes that any industry has been through, ever. In this lecture, entitled Holway's Themes, Revisited and Updated, Richard promises to collapse nearly 40 years of our collective history into less than 40 minutes, and to gaze into his well-polished crystal ball and point out where we may be going. Master, Wardens, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Richard Holway.
First of all, can I say how really honoured I am to be invited to give the Barney Gibbens lecture this year. Barney was one of the fathers of our industry, and I got to know him in the 80s and 90s during his time at CAP when I was an analyst. But I'm also very honoured to stand in the footsteps of some of the heroes of our sector, Dame Stephanie Shirley, Robin Saxby, and Herman Hauser. Some of you may know me for various different reasons. You may know me because of my time at Hoskins, now Capgemini, where I was the group marketing director back in the 1970s. I would guess that if you're going to know me, you'll probably know me from my Richard Holway Limited days, the Holway Report, System House, and indeed the internet blog Hot News. And I think I'm quite proud of the fact that Hot News and now Hot Views, I think, is probably one of the longest blogs, technology blogs, that is still in existence today, still getting over 20,000 people reading it every day. I sold my company to Ovum in 2000, and then I also, in that year, joined with James Bennett and John O'Connell in forming the Prince's Trust Technology Leadership Group, which again, I think a number of you may know about. I think that group has now raised over 100 million for the trust during that period of time. I also have served as a non-executive director of numerous companies. Indeed, one of them, the most recent one, was the Alliance Technology Trust, which when we formed it in 2007 had a market value of 50 million, and I think today now it's about 1.4 billion, something again I'm very proud about. But most recently, in 2008, joined forces with my business partner, Anthony Miller, to co-found Tech Market View, of which I was the chairman up until only 2 months ago, when I'm very proud that at my advancing age, managed to do a management buyout to Tola Sargent and the team. So you'll probably know me from one of those activities. Can I start by saying that, reminding you that my major subject of research over the last 40 years as an analyst has been the UK software and IT services sector. And the data that I'm going to present today and talk about relates to that. It doesn't necessarily relate to communications or to hardware, but I think practically all of the conclusions would be just as applicable to those two sectors as well. And during my time as an analyst, I've introduced a whole range of different themes. In fact, it's a bit like a Monty Python sketch, in that the things that you introduced during the first 5 minutes then go on through the show and through the whole of the series, and I quite like that continuity. But I guess my loudest and longest theme has been, dare I say, the rape and pillage of the UK ownership of its own software and IT services industry. Back when I started in 1986 being an analyst, it was an industry valued at 1.6 billion. And as you can see from that chart, 9 out of the top 10 suppliers of software and IT services to the UK marketplace were headquartered in the UK. Remarkable situation. You turn the clock forward a little less than 40 years, and you can see that that situation is completely reversed. Now 9 out of the 10 are headquarters abroad. Only one of them, Capita, is headquartered in the UK, and dare I say it, that ranking is slipping down and down and down every year. You'll also notice that it wasn't just the Yanks, if you mind me saying, that have taken over our industry. You'll see that 2 of the major companies there are actually French. And if we look back at Barney's Cap Group, they first of all merged with Sema in the UK in 1988, and then they were taken over by a French company called Schlumberger, and then they were eventually sold to Atos. And as you can see, Atos is 10th in our list, so that's where Barney's Cap Group, the genesis of that, still remains. But you could ask, if the French are able to produce and still have 2 of the largest IT services companies supplying the UK marketplace, why does the UK have none of those? And if the Indian headquarters companies, as you can see, there are 3 of those in the top 10, and they've basically done that by organic growth alone. And you'll also see that the number 1 this year is Amazon Web Services, which of course didn't exist 40 years ago. But you'll also notice that 5 out of the top 10 in 1986 were bureaus. They basically were running data centers. So why is it again that the UK has no cloud provider of any significance that is headquartered in the UK? Maybe we can come on during questions and answers to talking about why that might be, because after all, the UK is always reckoned to be the 3rd most significant technology marketplace in the world. If you go anywhere in the world, you'll find many UK educated, UK British people running those companies, being involved at a very high level in those companies. Our technical abilities are second to none, which is the main reason why many of the world's largest companies like Google and Meta and Microsoft and whatever have their development centers over here in the UK. But it really is a very interesting point about why we, to this day, do not have any large big tech companies, big software companies, big IT services companies actually headquartered over here. When the first Holway report was published in 1988, it had as its first theme, and the theme was acquisition indigestion. By the way, that's a picture of me when I was 40 years old. I don't know where the time has gone, where those years have gone in between. Acquisition indigestion was all about not taking over companies of the wrong type or wrong size. And all that I was saying was that eating small meals is often the healthy option. But companies kept on buying companies which are almost as big as them, which almost universally failed. There are so many examples that I could spend the rest of this lecture talking them through with you. And don't believe that it only happened 20 years ago or 30 years ago. We've actually had an example relatively recently. Back in 2016, Micro Focus was a member of the FTSE 100 with a market cap of 7 billion. They'd achieved this by a string of quite sensible and relatively moderate acquisitions. But then they came across the biggie. They bid 8.8 billion for HP's software business, which, by the way, had also in its own time swallowed up another FTSE 100 company, and that's Autonomy. Again, I could give another lecture about Autonomy, but I don't think I'll go down that particular rabbit hole today. This, of course, broke all of the Holway's acquisition indigestion rules. And despite many warnings, the problems became greater and greater, and Micro Focus lost 80% of its value from its high. And then in August 22, a US company called OpenTech bid 6 billion for the company. And in early 2023, Micro Focus was delisted, and we lost yet another UK headquartered software and IT services provider. And even in this last month, another two look as though they're going that way. Sofian and Instem, both receiving bids and likely to be delisted in the next period. Of course, I recognize that acquisitions are absolutely vital for our industry, but do the same as the Googles and the Apples and the Microsofts do, and that is take over lots and lots and lots of small companies, small teams, specialist activities. That, to me, seems the right way of operating your acquisition strategy. The next thing that, and I guess in a way, the thing I'm best known for is my boring awards. Now, this all happened back in 1992 when Alan Kane, who was a very well-known tech correspondent for the Financial Times, phoned me up and asked me what I thought about Admiral's results. And he wrote this up in the paper the following day, saying that, and I quote, analyst Richard Holway commented that Admiral's latest results for the year ending the 31st of December 1991 were boring, whereas what I actually said was that they were boringly consistent. And I got a number of CEOs who called me up and said, look, we're just as boring as Admiral. And this actually gave way to a new definition of the term boring, which I then defined as any publicly listed company with 10 or more years of uninterrupted earnings per share growth, which is actually a very difficult thing to achieve. The second company that actually got the award was Triad, and as you know, Alistair Fulton is a past master of the WCIT, and he actually referenced his boring award in his speech to you when he was installed as being very, very proud to have received the boring award. Now, I will say, with no disrespect to Alistair, that unfortunately Triad got rather too exciting after that and actually lost their boring award. But again, he was very, very proud to receive it. And by the way, Alistair, just like me, has just retired from the board of Triad after many, many, many years, and I wish him very well in his retirement. Now, the two CEOs, the two companies that had the boring award for the longest were Sage and Capita. And here is me presenting Paul Walker at Sage and Paul Pinder at Capita with their actual boring awards back in 2012. And it is really interesting to note that both of those companies, and indeed one of the characteristics of all boring companies, is that they have long-standing CEOs, people that have been with their business for 10, 20, sometimes even 30 years. Now, the only recipient, the only current holder of the Holway Boring Award is Computer Center. In fact, Computer Center are now within 2 years of actually having a 20-year Holway Boring Award. And that would be an absolutely major achievement. And again, this is a picture of me presenting the Boring Award to Mike Norris. And Mike Norris has sent me an email that he has asked me to tell you all that he has no intention of resigning or leaving Computer Centre, because clearly, as you can see, everyone who's had a boring award has actually got rid of that boring award or had to give it back soon after the CEO has actually left. But, you know, is being boring actually good for shareholders? It's quite interesting, isn't it, that if you take 2005 as a base year, the FTSE 100 is up 50% since 2005. Now, Computer Centre shares are up 5.6 times since 2005, and the Nasdaq is up 6.5 times since 2005. Obviously, if you choose different dates, you get completely different results, but that is the base year for Computer Centre starting to get their boring award. Now, I would say that at the other end of the scale, one of the most exciting companies in our sector has been Amazon, and I'm sure you will probably all agree with that. And Amazon's will never get a boring award. In fact, for many years they have been loss making. They go from great profits to losses, and they don't really care about that. Now, if you had actually invested in Amazon, and I have to say that I did in 2005, your shares would now be up a massive 58 times. So maybe being boring is actually an almost impossible accolade to get, but in terms of getting exciting returns, maybe there are other ways of doing it. Back in 1999, I gave my first presentation, I think it was for the CSSA or for Intellect at that particular time, where I used music. And the music that I used was Nat King Cole singing "There May Be Troubles Ahead," and it proved to be pretty prophetic. In 1997, 1998, the UK software and IT services sector recorded its best ever growth, up 20% in real terms. But this was not because of the dot-com boom. It was because companies had put in new systems ahead of the much feared Y2K bug. And Jeff Unwin said to me at the time, and I reported on it, that making profits, he, by the way, was the CEO of Capgemini in the UK at that particular time. And he said that making profits in 1998 was like shooting fish in a barrel. But Jeff also told me that he thought that we were in a Y2K microclimate, and he thought that the Y2K hangover would not go away with the Alka-Seltzers on the 1st of January 2000. And again, these are two things that I nicked from Jeff, and I put my hand up and say that these are things that inspired me to write articles and make comments about these. And indeed, I suppose that my role as an analyst has actually been all about talking to people constantly throughout the day, many lunches, many dinners, many drinks with the CEOs in our industry, gaining their trust so that they could actually tell me things that perhaps they don't want to be recorded publicly against their names, but actually made sure that I understood or tried to understand what was going on in the sector. And if I did nick some of the things from those CEOs when I wrote my articles or when I wrote my comments, then so be it. I put my hand up to that theft. But you'll also see that I also had great fun in the lead up to the dot-com crash. Many of the things that I said, like the Emperor's New Clothes and .com, etc., went around the world. But I think one of the things that I was most proud about was inventing a company called freejellybeans.com, which again was reported all the way around the world as an example of how you could turn an idea into a company worth $500 million in the space of 6 months, which, by the way, is what a lot of companies were doing at that time. And it was an amalgam of companies that if you're around at that stage, you may have heard of, called FreeServe, which was the largest provider of internet services, a company called Jellyworks, and a company called Beans, spelt with a Z, which was basically a Green Shield stamps operation for the for the internet e-commerce arena. In 2002, I gave my first speech for the Prince's Trust. And again, I used another piece of music, and the music that I used was the Rolling Stones' It's All Over Now. And what I did was to analyze what had happened in the UK auto sector once it had become mature. I did quite a lot of analysis which showed how it had gone through a number of phases: a pioneer phase, a mass market phase, and then it reached maturity. And during its maturity, it basically bumped around at about 1 or 2 times gross domestic product. And the reason for that is that cars became highly deflationary. Cars became much, much, much cheaper and to buy in terms of people's wages. In fact, about a third of the cost over a period of 60 years. And also during that period, what we saw was the total demise of UK headquartered marques of companies. There were over 60 UK-owned companies, and they all got acquired by overseas companies. And all I did was to compare the UK software and IT services industry, which again had been growing at 4 times gross domestic product during its previous decades, and I forecast that as it was reaching its maturity phase, it would grow at between 1 and 2 times gross domestic product. Because you see, IT is also deflationary. And if you don't believe that, just go back and look at how much you were paying for your internet connection 20 years ago, or how much you were paying for your PC or for your printer or whatever, and you'll find that it's a fraction of the cost today. And that was the basis of my forecast of saying that our industry was in for a period where its growth would be between 1 and 2 times gross domestic product. And I got pilloried for it. These are just some of the quotes which appeared in the national press at the time as a result of the analysis that I actually did. But this is the growth rate of our sector during the last 20 years. It doesn't give me much satisfaction of saying it, but over the last 20 years, yes, indeed, we have grown at between 1 and 2 times gross domestic product in each year. And as you can see, in a number of years, our industry actually declined. During the whole of my period as an analyst, I've gone in to speak to people about their growth rate, and they've often told me, we have grown by 20%. And I said, well, just a minute, does that include all of the operations that you closed down in the current year? Oh, no, that's just the ones that are continuing. Oh, by the way, does it include all the acquisitions that you've done? Oh, no, that's just, that's a comparison between our size, including those acquisitions, and our size last year, excluding them. And this is the reason why you have to be very careful in the way in which you do your analysis. And then, of course, we come to the year 2020. We all know what happened then. The world was hit with COVID. This, by the way, created a huge opportunity for tech and for software and IT services in general. Indeed, growth in 2022 with 12% in real terms. That's the highest growth rate that we've had in 20 years in our sector. And if you mind me saying, the similarities between those years and 1997, 1998, 1999 are actually quite significant, because both of those growth rates were because of an event. In the case of the 1990s, it was due to the Y2K and everybody bringing things forward for that. And of course, in the last couple of years, it was everybody preparing for people to work at home, the major shift to e-commerce and online, etc., etc. But also, in both of those periods, we've actually had a generational change. Back in 1999-2000, we had the internet. And of course, now everybody is talking about AI. Back then, all you had to do was to add $1 money. Everybody wanted to invest in you. And you almost get the feeling again today that all you have to do is to say that you are, can you still hear me all right? Yes? Jolly good. And all you have to do today is to say that that you're involved in AI. And again, everybody wants to rush to invest in you. And by the way, if you were a chartist looking at that chart, I'm afraid to say that you might come to the conclusion that we are in for another period of quite slow growth. And indeed, many of the companies that we talk to at the moment, indeed Computer Center, which I've talked about today, if you look at their latest earnings results, they talk about the difficulty of the UK marketplace at the moment. And we've only got to look at some of the other announcements in the last week or so to show that, you know, the UK market, the technology marketplace at the moment, perhaps is in not quite such a good state as we all hoped that it would be. In 2003, I introduced a thing called my Martini moment, which was the ability to access the internet anytime, anywhere, and from any device. And that was because, and I used one of the tests for this as being the Archers. I've been a lifelong fan of the Archers. In 2003, you could only listen to the Archers on the radio at the time that it was broadcast. Indeed, I often ensured I was in my car at 7:02 in order to listen. Then in that year, internet radio was launched. And then in 2007, the iPlayer was launched. And this allowed me to listen on my laptop, assuming that I had an internet connection anywhere. And indeed, a long time of readers of what I wrote, I chronicled how I was able to listen to the Archers on an aeroplane in the middle of the ocean, on a cruise ship. I was able to do it in every continent of the world. And now, of course, I can do the same with TV and video too. And as to the future, well, fans of Star Trek will remember the holodeck. But many of the other things that Star Trek pioneered have actually come to be. So why not the holodeck as well? That's holograms actually in your living room. And, you know, it isn't impossible to imagine that you could be in the Bull at Ambridge and actually see the actors around you, walk around the bar, etc., etc., etc. And if you actually link that with haptics, which is the ability to actually get to actually feel things as well, you could actually have a sensation, a very, very realistic sensation in your own living room. Now, when that will actually happen, I do not know. But as we've seen from things like ABBA's Voyage and the various other things at the moment, this is not so far-fetched. But I would say that one of the things that we did, I remember at Oven back in the 1990s, was look at who were the major users of VHS tapes at that particular time, which was proven to be the pornography industry. So I somehow feel that this might be a godsend for the pornography industry too. In 2005, I introduced a thing called MyTop, which was basically a cloud-based personal interface that I wanted to see on my PC, on my iPad, that would take over from the desktop or the web top, which were owned respectively by Microsoft and Google. Basically, what I wanted to see was an everything app. And in 2007, I wrote an open letter to Mark Zuckerberg saying, MyTop, this could be you, Mark. And I wrote all the things that it should do and suggested that Facebook could actually be the MyTop of the future. By the way, he never answered my email. What actually happened, though, was that there was a Chinese company called WeChat, which was launched in 2011, which does almost exactly what MyTop was planned to do. In other words, it integrated payments and integrated everything you wanted to do in one application. WeChat now has 1.7 billion monthly average users, 80% of them in China, so you've probably never heard of it here, and 60% of the Chinese population of that are connected to the internet now use WeChat. It is an amazing phenomenon. And of course, if you recognize what Elon Musk is doing with Twitter, as you know, he changed the name to X, and he has registered the name many years ago called the Everything app, and he wants to change X into the Everything app. So again, all coming back to something which was perhaps predictable back in 2005, but all this time on, nobody has actually ever done it. And can I say that this was perhaps a very good example of what I have said on a number of occasions. I'm not being big-headed when I say that I get most of my predictions right, because I can also be self-deprecating by saying that I get most of my timescales completely wrong. You see, the point about technology is that we know that everything will get faster, everything will get cheaper, and everything will get smaller. The real problem is that we don't know the timescales that are actually going to be involved. And as I said, that is the thing that I often get wrong. And this is, I think, very much the case today. There is absolutely no doubt that AI will be a generational change in what we do. It will be as important, if not more important, than what happened with the internet. I have absolutely no doubt about that. But at the moment, the only people that are making money out of it are the picks and shovels providers, NVIDIA and whatever, are the people who are really making money out of it. The people that are using AI, it is very difficult at the moment to actually work out who is actually making money out of it. Not to say that that won't happen in the future, but not at the moment. It's exactly the position we had with the internet. And again, I've listed down here a number of things that I consider to be certainties. We will have EVs on our streets, and we will get rid of fossil fuel based cars. When? I'm not so sure about when that will happen. Autonomous vehicles, we've been talking about those now for 20 years. I think it will be at least another 20 years before we find that they will become ubiquitous on our streets as well. AR and VR, I've always wanted a pair of glasses that I can put on, that when I go into a room, when I go into a cocktail reception or whatever, I can use those glasses and I can look at Rob and it would immediately say, recognize his face and say, this is Rob, his wife's name is so-and-so, you know him from so-and-so, so I can go up to Rob and as if I remember all of the details about him. And I would love a pair of glasses like that. In fact, the pair of glasses I show here are the Ray-Bans that Meta released only a month ago. It doesn't have any projection on the screen, but it does have 2 cameras in it, and it does have 2 loudspeakers in the ear, so that you can, technically speaking, ask it to do something, and it will give you a voice reply. And it's the same with Elon Musk Neuralink, which is basically a link directly into your brain. I think at some point in the next 100 years, again, that will become possible, just as we all really hope that at some point there will be a cure for cancer. But as I said, some of these things can be put down as certainties, but the time factors involved, I think, are the thing that always makes things difficult. So back in 2002, I gave the last of my State of the IT Nation speeches at the BT Tower for the Prince's Trust, a series of lectures which raised £1 million in their own right for the Prince's Trust, because we charged £1,000 for everybody to come to it. And the piece of music that I used then was the Rolling Stones, The Last Time. I wanted to play it for you again today, but there seemed to be some copyright rules which we couldn't overcome. But I'm not going to offer to sing it to you, but if you remember, the words go, well, this could be the last time, this could be the last time, maybe the last time, I don't know, oh no, oh no. So there we go. You see, another prediction. At some point in time, Holway will give his last lecture, but I'm just not quite so sure at the moment about when that will be. So thank you very much indeed.